So what I want to do now is come back and I want to start talking about models. I'm going to skip a whole bunch of slides I've got here that are already up online for you because I've already talked through them. So now we're going to transition into a discussion about valuation models. And I want you to recognize that we're going to deal with 3 different model forms tonight. And each of the model forms that we're going to deal with are referred to as multi-stage models. There is such a thing as a single stage model. And here, if you look at the Gordon growth structure, right here, this is a single stage model. And the stage refers to the time frames. It is lumping all periods of time into one category. So we run one model. Now, what you've been doing is you've been running a multi-stage model up to this point, where we've got a stage that represents the discounted cash flow during the explicit period, and then a second stage that represents the continuation period, right? So this is a 2-stage model. Now it's possible we could have had a 4, 5, 6, or 8-stage model. We could apply a different growth rate to each one of our forecasted years, in which case we've got another stage for each time we've done that. But we tend not to separate these in saying 2-stage versus single stage. We say single stage and multi-stage, okay? And a multi-stage may be 2 and it may be 10, but it's a multi-stage. So we have our single stage models, and that would be dependent upon growth being constant from this moment throughout all perpetuity. Kind of a broad brushstroke, right? Not very realistic. Even more broad than putting this Gordon growth model out 5 or 6 years and calling it our continuation. And then we've got our multi-stage model that lets us break these into some different pieces. Okay? Any questions about the multi-stage characteristic of this? You're kind of already used to them. Okay? You've been playing with single stage in the Gordon growth, and you've been playing with multi-stage in the way that we've done our multi-column evaluation structure. Oops, excuse me. Here is the free cash flow model. And I'm going to bring up for you a couple of quick sheets that I have in Canvas for you. And I meant to send them to you tonight, but they're already in Canvas for this week, so you should be able to grab them pretty easily. So a couple of finance quick sheets. And I'm going to first bring up the valuation model quick sheet. And then I'm also going to bring up the valuation model structures quick sheet. And I'll go to the valuation model quick sheet first. I want you to start to notice something. We have the free cash flow driver model. We have the key value driver model. And in the free cash flow model, in our first stage, we have the sum of all the free cash flows that we've forecasted divided by a discount or 1 plus a discount rate. Then we add them all up, right? And that correlates with this explicit periods discounting. And this is our first stage in a 2-stage construction. Okay? You're kind of used to this already. It's not foreign to you at all anymore. If we want to look at the key value driver model, it's very similar. It's a 2-stage model. Stage 1, stage 2. Stage 1, stage 2. What's the difference between the free cash flow model and the key value driver model? They're both 2-stage models, right? Where do they differ? Andrew, do you see it? It's okay.
No plot?
Yeah, there's something going on there, isn't there? So I'm going to rearrange this just a little bit, so bear with me. I'm going to give myself another line here so we can do some stuff. And I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to copy it down to here. And now I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to copy it as well. And bear with me as I do this. I'll get to a point where it'll make some sense here in a moment. And I'm going to say that everything I know tells me that the free cash flow model should equal the key value driver model. Because haven't we argued that evaluation model's structure shouldn't change the value that we calculate? A model, if it's a credible model, should give us the same value either way we look at it, right? So let's make the assumption that that's true. And I want us to find the difference in these models. Well, they share more than they have. They share the same things more than they're different. Both sides of this equation have the sum of free cash flow divided by 1 plus r to the t, or 1 plus whack to the t. So what I do to one side of the equation, I can do to the other, right? So I'm going to go and subtract this summation from this side of the equation, and I'm going to subtract it from that side of the equation. Because when I've done that, I'm still good algebraically, right? What else do I want to get rid of here? Well, if I multiply both sides of both of these equations by 1 plus whack to the t, what happens?
You're left with the numerators.
Yeah, so if I multiply both sides by this number, that means the denominator disappears. Okay? And I now have a new fractional equation that once again share the same denominators. I'm gonna multiply both sides of each of these equations by whack minus g. And when I do that, Andrew, what happens? If I'm going to multiply both sides of both of these equations, I got a middle equal sign in the middle here. If I'm going to multiply both sides by whack minus g, what's going to happen?
They will be gone.
Yeah, the whack minus g is going to disappear.
It goes away.
Goes away. History. So these two models differ only in the continuation term. And Michael Schwartz, do we think under some circumstances that free cash flow is equal to no plat divided by, or times 1 minus g divided by ROIC? Free cash flow is equal to no plat times 1 minus g divided by ROIC. Do we believe that?
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, it's one of our knowns in the quick sheets, right? It's a given. Do these come up with, when I calculate free cash flow, given my equation for free cash flow, do I come up with the same value necessarily that I come up with when I take no plat times 1 minus g divided by ROIC? I don't, do I, Andrew?
No.
Yeah, and we know that from the second week of class. So now we start to deal with these two models, okay? And we have to consider what's going on that drives possible differences. So let me move to my Mirage-Ravana sheet. Your Excel assignment for this week will be to replicate the valuation structures. Not all of it. You'll be replicating the free cash flow structure, the KVD structure, and the APV structure. Well, the first two are very simple. They have the exact same structure during the explicit period, don't they? Let me go back to where we were. Excuse me. They have the exact same structure during the explicit period. So if you've done the explicit period for one of these, you've done it for all. Let me see if I can bring back these. Yeah, I can. So right here, and this one's free cash flow, that is just like that. So if you know that for one of these, you know it for both of them. Okay? That's a walk in the park. Then we have the present value of the discounted cash flows. If you know it for one, you know it for both. And we know that in the free cash flow model, we're going to use the Gordon growth construction right here. And we know how to do that. And in fact, in this model, we're actually not using Gordon growth any longer, but we kind of are. We're using some cash flow variable divided by WACC minus G. That's Gordon growth. So we're really using the Gordon growth construction again, but it may give us a slightly different value. So let's look at what might be acceptable here. So here in the continuing value, I have exactly what you would expect. I have the cash flow at time 1 divided by the discount rate minus the growth rate. In the key value driver model, in the continuation term, I'm simply using no plat times 1 minus G divided by ROIC to give me a substitute for free cash flow, because it's one of the acceptable forms of free cash flow. Do you remember the 3 times I told you you would use the KVD form of free cash flow?
When you said so.
That's 1.
Something about multiples.
That's
Valuation
2.
multiples.
And the 3rd time is when we're motivating the key value driver model. Welcome to the key value driver model, which is insignificantly different than the free cash flow model. And the difference can be seen simply right here. I'm going to bring up another quick sheet, and that is the valuation model structures quick sheet, which for some people makes this a little easier to see. I've broken it down so you see the components. And here we've got free cash flow, and here we have KVD, okay? The first part of these models are virtually identical. We then differ slightly in how we calculate the continuing value. It means the same thing though, but it's a slightly different calculation. And then we take whatever that is and we discount it back to today. So in each case, we have the present value of the discounted cash flow plus the present value of the continuing value. The only difference is that the continuing value is articulated slightly differently. Otherwise, they're the exact same models. Does that make sense?
Is that why they call it the key value drive model? Because there's just that one little value difference, I guess?
It's not so much that, Matt, it's because no plat, G, and ROIC are what McKinsey and Company believes, and WACC and G, okay? What McKinsey and Company believes are the key drivers of value changes in companies. If I can change a company's ROIC, I change its value. If I can change a company's no plat, I change its value. If I can change its G, I change its value, okay? And you can see that. I mean, in the forecasting we've done, you can even see that if you look at the forecasting. So these are simply what McKinsey calls the key drivers for value changes, or the key value drivers. They're the ones that came up with that term, by the way. The model form, it wasn't created by them, and it's not unique to them. They gave it that term, and it is their model of preference. They're amongst a very small group of consultancies that choose to use the key value driver model. Most consultancies use the free cash flow model as the income-based model. I want you to think back to our first night of class, in which I told you there were 3 ways to value an asset. We value it based upon book value, so what we paid for it on the balance sheet. That would be similar to the asset valuation. We value it on production value, or what it produces for us. An asset produces cash flow for us as investors. That's sometimes referred to as the production model or the income-based evaluation, which is virtually always going to use the free cash flow model structure. And then there is a market-based valuation. Those were our three: book value, market value, production value. You might remember them. Well, book value is asset-based. Just looking at the value of the assets sit on the books, adding them up. Second is production value. It's using some of our discounted cash flow models we've been using, sometimes referred to as income-based. And next week, we'll discuss market-based. We won't discuss market-based tonight, I don't think. I might give you a little hint to it if we feel like we have time. So we have those two model forms, and they are insignificantly different than each other. And not surprising, by and large, they result in very similar outcomes. We have an outcome of less than 2.5 difference here. Or that's a little bit more than 1.5, right? A little bit more than 1.5 difference. That's a very insignificant difference when we're dealing with 600 to start with. Okay, so this makes sense to us. And you're going to get used to motivating this, but remember that we have this whole forecast to help us. And we use the same free cash flows in each case. And in the continuation term, we use the free cash flow at time 1. But in this continuation term, we don't use free cash flow at time 1. We use no plat at time 1 in the continuation. Okay? Andrew, what is the single purpose for us having gone through this entire forecasting structure?
Estimate the cash flow growth.
That's it. To estimate free cash flow. Otherwise, we would not have gone through all of this. And I don't think it's been that bad, but it looks a little bit more daunting than it is, right? You guys assimilated this a whole lot faster than you assimilated some of the other concepts I've thrown at you. Okay? We do this entire thing to estimate cash flows. And the one that's most important to us is free cash flow. But now I'm going to ask you to accept a premise. Taylor, as a business owner, if I can give you an extra dollar of profit by increasing revenue, or I can give you an extra, I'm one of your managers, okay? I can give you an extra dollar of profit by increasing your revenues, or I can give you an extra dollar of profit by decreasing your expenses. Do you care which way I've gotten you that extra dollar of profit?
As the owner, no.
Yeah, not so much, right? You just care that I gave you an extra dollar of profit. Let's be honest. And owners and investors are in the exact same camp with this. They're interested in profit, or in our terminology, cash flow. Okay? So if I give you cash flow based upon some free cash flow, you're good. Or if I give you cash flow based upon some other form of cash flow, you would probably also be good, right? So I want to introduce to you the adjusted present value model. And you're going to not be happy for a minute, and then you'll settle down and not hate me. Well, maybe that's a stretch. You won't hate me as much, okay? Here's the adjusted present value model. The adjusted present value is the value based upon some free cash flow plus the value based upon a tax shield. Well, the value based upon some free cash flow is the free cash flow model as you know it, with one difference. And that is the use of KU instead of WACC. So we've talked about discount rates being inflation rate maybe, a hurdle rate of an investor, interest rate if we went out and borrowed the money, WACC if we are looking at it from the standpoint of the company. And I want to introduce conceptually 2 additional forms of a discount rate tonight. You will not be responsible to calculate this rate, okay? And the calculation for one of these is complex, and the calculation for the other one is completely theoretical. And it's virtually impossible to get to it other than by reverse engineering. So I'm not going to have you do that. I just want you to think about it, okay? In the free cash flow form, or VFCF, so half of the adjusted present value model, the only difference between this and the value based upon the free cash flow model itself is the introduction of a different discount rate. And that discount rate is KU. K stands for cost, and it's the cost of unlevered capital. The U stands for unlevered, KU, the cost of unlevered capital. That's different than the cost of levered capital. And levered and unlevered here mean capital that has not been exposed to any debt, so no leverage is being used. That's unlevered. And levered capital is the cost of capital where debt has been used. Typically, when we're looking at the cost of levered capital, that's synonymous with KE or RE. And you know RE from our CAPM structures and such. Because think about it, if a company has any debt, then that RE is levered capital's cost, right? If a company has any debt, the common stock is affected by that leverage. It is levered capital. So RE is synonymous with KE. You don't see KE here, but it's the cost of equity from a levered standpoint. Well, unfortunately, we rarely see unlevered capital because even the company that has some current liabilities is utilizing some debt, right? Or that uses credit cards is using some debt. So it has some levered capital. So this KU is theoretical. And the only way we can get to it is by reverse engineering. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I'll put on my face mask to protect you, okay?
Bless you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So otherwise, this is just the free cash flow model. And it's articulated structurally exactly as you would expect it to be. This is the free cash flow model, isn't it? I got to bring it down some. This is a free cash flow model. Same free cash flows. Oh, the discounted values are a little bit different, and the outcome is a little bit different because I used that different discount rate. And notice here I've given this footnote. In this example, KU is equal to 15.5%, which is why you put 15.5% up here if you were being dutiful when you put together this assignment. Okay? It's simply, it's simply the free cash flow model using a different form of the discount rate. Okay? But now I'm going to tell you that this company that has debt, and our company does have debt, it has another cash flow that we haven't been considering. And we've not considered that because it's a cash flow that was discretionarily applied. But if it exists, we may want to think about its repercussions and what comes from it. And that cash flow is what we're going to call the tax shield. Do any of you know what the tax shield is? Okay, so Andrew, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. So go ahead and come off mute. So if our company has debt, then we're paying interest, right?
Yes.
And when we pay interest, interest is deductible from taxable income on the income statement.
Okay.
Come over here. Deductible from income on the income statement, right there. Right?
Yeah.
And if we have that deduction for interest right here, if we have that, it's probably going to reduce the amount of taxes we paid because it reduces our taxable income.
Correct.
In which case, we're going to save some money that we would have otherwise paid in taxes. Taylor, did you care whether you got an extra dollar of profit from saving you money or giving you more revenue? You didn't care, did you?
Yep.
Huh. So Taylor is our perfect example here. He recognizes there's virtue and value in this additional cash flow. It's not part of our free cash flow. It's not part of the non-discretionary operational decision, but it is embedded in this company if the company has debt and if that debt pays interest. So we calculate the tax shield by taking the interest paid and multiplying it by the tax rate. So the tax shield is the interest paid for whatever year multiplied by the tax rate. And that represents the amount of savings we have on our tax liability because we have the debt. That's the tax shield. The interest is shielding some of our income from taxes, and it's saving us some tax money. So it's another cash flow. And if we know how to value a company based upon a cash flow, when it shows us that there's two cash flows, all we have to do is add one of those cash flows, the present value of it, to the present value of another one. And we get the present value, we get the present value of the company. Because if one cash flow can add value to us, another cash flow for the same company adds more value. Does that make sense?
I just have one question, Rick. So
Please.
in those two new models you kind of introduced, right? One where you're using the unlevered debt as the discount rate, and then you're also using the tax shield as a cash flow, right? Then you're using them in that formula there. You're adding them together. Well, if the KU is just another discount rate, why can't I, or maybe I can, but why can't I just take the value of the tax shield and add it to my cash flows when I use WAC as my discount rate?
Good question. Because the discount rate we apply to the tax shield is different than the discount rate we apply to free cash flow. And here's why. So Matt, can I make the assumption that you pay taxes?
Yes.
Yeah. Begrudgingly or not, you pay taxes, right? If you didn't have to pay taxes, let's say it's $1,000 in tax that you might pay in a year. If you didn't have to pay that tax, is there something else you would do with that money?
Yes.
Okay. You would invest it, you would save it, you would spend it, you would just not have paid taxes. Do you get any benefit as part of our society for having paid taxes?
Yes.
Okay. Give me an example of one of those benefits.
I get roads fixed.
Okay.
So that I can drive on
Agreed.
to work.
Fire departments,
Right.
unpopular though it may be this month, police protection or not, right? You get some federal and state government, which like them or hate them, we have them, right? Okay. You get border protection. You get public schools, public hospitals. You get all kinds of things. Now, you may or may not use these things. You use the roads, right? Unwittingly, you use the police and the fire protection. You use our military protection. You may or may not know you're using it, but you are. You're living in the society that is benefited by those things at some level. And so because you could do something else with the money, but having paid the money, you get something back. The discount rate is different. And commonly we think that the discount rate we would apply to the tax shield is going to be equal to the discount rate or cost of debt. Any idea why we would make that connection?
No.
So Senator Archibald, I'm going to have you come off of mute here for a moment. As I recall, you're the U.S. Senator from the state of Utah, and you and your cohorts in Congress and in the Senate have realized that we do not have as many dollars in tax receipts this year, or tax income from taxes, as we do expenses that you and your friends are trying to pay for or have allocated through the Congress, right? You guys have committed to more expenses than we've got taxes to pay for it. how do you come up with the difference? Where's the money come from?
Can you increase taxes? I know that's not a popular opinion, but
Well, you can, and then it'll be Senator Trexler next time. So you like being Senator Archibald, so let's not do that. And by the way, it takes time to do that, and you can't do it in arrears. So
Right.
when our government spends more money than we brought in taxes, where's the money come from?
take a loan, go into debt.
We borrow it, right? And we borrow it by issuing treasury instruments. What is RD? We say it's the 10-year, or we say it's debt, right? It's the cost of debt. So we think of K-tax as being synonymous in most cases with RD. Because if we don't raise the money in tax, we borrow it. We think of it as being synonymous with RD. Okay? So back to your question, Matt, why don't we just add FCF and the tax shield together and slap one discount rate on them? Because they're two different types of cash flows, and they're thought of, and their opportunity costs are different.
And just to clarify, they're different in cash flows because one of them is, the first one we learned about, which is just kind of through the, I guess you'd just say the operation of the business. And the other one is because of the tax shield. It's basically because we're taking that interest and we're getting a deduction on it. So it's actually giving us an additional cash flow. Is that what you're saying?
Say that one more time, please.
So I guess I'm just confused as to why they're not necessarily confused. I just need clarification on why they're two different cash flows. So we have the original cash flow we talked about, but the tax shield cash flow, that is a cash flow because we are getting some sort of benefit tax-wise on our interest expense?
Yeah, we're saving some tax expense because we paid interest on debt, and the interest is deductible from taxable income.
Okay, gotcha. That's what I meant to say in a much more articulate way than I said it. So yeah.
Think of it as a taxpayer. Any of you that own a home, when you fill out your taxes, you get to reduce your taxable income because of all that interest you paid on your mortgage, right? You saved money in taxes. Now, it may be a pittance of a benefit to you because you had to pay the interest, but you saved the money in taxes. And that's the rationale. That's why it's another cash flow. So we have the FCF, or the value of the free cash flow, discounted at KU, plus the value of the tax shield, discounted at K-tax. And you won't be required to calculate KU or K-tax. They'll somehow be given you. But if you know what these are, and frankly you do, because you have estimated all of them, you can motivate then the adjusted present value model. And you come up with this one present value based upon the cash flows, free cash flows, and this next value based upon the tax shield, and you add them together and it gives us a value. Okay?
One other quick question, Rick, on the tax shield, the
Yeah.
VTAX. So just to make sure I'm following correctly, those two new models, the FCF and the VTAX, one of them we're using a different discount rate, one of them we're using a different cash flow. My question on the tax shield, what is the discount rate we're using for that?
We're using K-tax, and K-tax is going to be, for our purposes, synonymous with RD.
Okay.
Okay? K-tax will equal RD. And and you can probably barely see it here, and you might have recognized it on your Excel assignment. You see these same footnotes that K-tax is taken as RD, and KU is equal to 15.5%. In this case. Now,
Right.
You're going to do a problem set. I don't know if it's the one coming up or if it's the one afterwards, where you'll motivate the adjusted present value model, okay? And in that problem set, if I remember correctly, I allow you to use WACC for KU and K-tax. Why would that be a problematic assumption? Why can we not do that?
Because of that explanation you just gave us, which I can't repeat because it was complicated and long, but
Well, yeah,
that's the answer, right?
there's that too. There's that too, but there's an algebraic reason. Okay, so I'm going to go up here for a minute, and I'm going to substitute instead of the 15.5 and 4.75 I've got for KU and K-tax, I'm going to substitute WACC for them. So I'm going to say 0.1447, 0.1447. Okay, so now I've imposed the condition that KU and K-tax both equal WACC under the premise that a discount rate's a discount rate. Do any of you immediately know the problem that I've just created?
Is it because WACC takes into consideration cost of debt and KU is unlevered, so it doesn't take the debt?
Very good. That is why we wouldn't do this. It's the conceptual reason why we would not do this, Diana. Very prescient of you to have pointed that out. That's not, and it's what motivates the problem that we're about to see, but it's not the problem itself. David, can you think of any problem that we're about to create in our valuations if we use the same discount rate for all of the possible cash flows?
I mean, they're all going to equal the same thing.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
let me show it to you more specifically. Notice that when I do that, the value from the free cash flow equals the value from the free cash flow, right? To which we're now about to add another small value. And in which case, if we do that, the two different valuation models by design will give us two different values, because you can't take some value and add something to it and say that it was still some value. A plus B cannot equal A unless B equals 0, right? A plus B cannot equal A unless B is equal to 0. And B is not equal to 0. B is our tax shield. So we know that KU and K-tax cannot equal WACC. Otherwise, we end up with two valuation models giving us meaningfully different outcomes.
So should those match, Rick? That value APV and value FCF should match if you had those figures incorrectly?
Pretty darn close.
Okay. So maybe not identically, but they, okay, I got you.
Yep. Just as these two come pretty darn close. And this one over here, which we're not going to really talk about tonight, but notice it's pretty darn close.
And I guess just to clarify again on the KU and kind of the point that Diana made. So maybe just a good way to think about it is like the KU is the unlevered debt. And when we use the RD, when we calculate WACC, we're using levered debt, right?
Right.
So that is another, maybe, I don't know if that's the answer to my previous question, but that's another component in why we can't substitute out any discount rate we feel like, because it depends on how we, the components and how we arrived at that discount rate.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. In fact, you could say then that the weighted average of KU and K-tax, when the weights are based upon the cash flows, the weighted average of them would be WACC. That's how we come up, and that's how we would know that we get the same outcome or something very similar to the same outcome. So all I really want you to get from this at the moment is that it is conceivable for our company to have an additional cash flow that has meaning to us. And that cash flow that we're thinking about is the tax shield. And that when we consider that additional cash flow, we are effectively going to have to impose a different model form as we value the asset. But just because we're using a different model form shouldn't make the value of the asset different. If I put an apple on the scale and it weighs out at 8 ounces, and I look at it straight on, it weighs out at 8 ounces. And I look at it from the side, it weighs out at 8 ounces. And from the other side and from the back, regardless of the perspective I look at it from, it's still an 8-ounce apple, right? Well, the perspective is synonymous with the model, but it shouldn't change that it's an 8-ounce apple or that it's approximately a 600 value company. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
When you say not change, even though those are slightly different values, you're saying those are two different perspectives as far as the models, but they're still pretty close.
Let me say it shouldn't change in a material way.
Right, yep.
That's probably a better way of putting it, because you're right, Matt. They clearly are tiny bit different.
Yeah, and not saying that to point out, I just rephrasing it just to make sure my understanding.
It shouldn't change it in a material way. They should be virtually identical, not literally identical. Okay?
Weren't you just saying that if the KU and K-tax were the same, that our values would be the same, and then that would be a way that we would know we were wrong or it was bad? Or
if KU and K-tax were the same and were equal to WAC, then we would end up with a different set of values here, a meaningfully different set of values. It's part of how we know that KU and K-tax are not equal to WAC.
so they would be different rather than the same.
Exactly. This value, if KU and K-tax were equal to WAC, then this value would be meaningfully different than this value.
Sorry, I just turned that around in my brain somehow.
Yeah, okay. Just think about it. In fact, this is where your critical thinking comes into play. Not just memorization, critical thinking. If A plus B equals C, then A can't equal C unless B is 0, right? Just make a critical thought exercise out of it as you're looking at it and thinking about it, and it'll get you there. So we wanted to recognize that no matter what perspective we look at the apple, it's still an 8-ounce apple or a company valued at 600. And the perspective is the model, okay? Wanted you to recognize that the valuation shouldn't be different, but that when we impose or consider an additional cash flow, it looks like it would have to be different until you considered Matt's explanation just a moment ago of KU and K-tax and why they would have to be different. So I want you to think about that some as you consider motivating the free cash flow, KVD, and adjusted present value models in both the next Excel assignment and in the next problem set where the APV model is brought into focus. What questions would you have?
So when we make the KVD, do we just copy FCF values PV and PV DCF from the previous?
Here's what I did, Diana. I copy each one of these from their source.
Mm-hmm.
I could have just as easily, instead of copying this first year's free cash flow from my forecast, I could have just as easily copied it from here. It's going to be the same number. But I tend to like to go back to the source every time. So rather than risk making a slight mistake, I like to always reference my original point. Okay?
Okay, and then PV DCF, do we copy from
No,
this one?
PV,
Yeah.
DCF, I calculate them each time.
Oh, okay.
And you could have copied it over, I could have simply said this equals this. It's not going to change anything. I tend to be a little bit of a purist on these. You don't so much have to be, as long as you get the outcome. Okay?
KVD, oh,
Key value driver.
but that has the, oh, it's only on the continuation value that it's different.
Only on the continuation. Very good. So you'll find we differ here by 3, which is part of why we differ here. But the metric that we use otherwise is identical. The only difference between these two models is in the numerator of the Gordon growth construction. That's it. And as it turns out, in this first one, we use free cash flow, the way we normally think of it. And in this one, well, we're still using free cash flow, just not in the way that we normally think of it, in the way McKinsey likes to think about it. And you might wonder why I keep deferring back to McKinsey. It's because it's hard for me to ignore the success of the largest consulting firm in the world. And here in the FCF, so half of the adjusted present value model, I got the exact same free cash flows. I'm discounting them the same way, but notice that my discounted values are different. And that's because my discount rate is different. Not a lot, but some. It's different. And then VFCF, I construct it in my basic multi-columnar form the exact same way, but now my cash flow is the tax shield. And the tax shield is equal to the interest expense. That's what is shielding the taxes, by the way, or shielding me from taxes. The interest expense times the tax rate. That's the tax shield. And you calculate that for each year. So I could go ahead and put a tax shield column here. And this tax shield column could be this times this. And I'm going to go ahead and do an absolute value reference on this. And now I've created those tax shields, which is the same numbers I have right here. And I could just go ahead and reference these up here instead of calculate it each time. Okay. So when I do this for other purposes, I always include the tax shield as one of my columns. I didn't have you do so because we didn't need to get to free cash flow, nor are you responsible to continue to do so. I'm just letting you know that I could have easily done so.